So welcome to another incredible The Outlier Project book club. We're very, very excited today for Iman. I'm going to do some very super quick housekeeping. So our book for this month is Mark Champagne's book, Personal Socrates. If you haven't bought it, make sure you get it. He's coming on December 6th. To talk about his book. It's absolutely unbelievable. We've got Daisy Auger Dominguez with Inclusion Revolution. And then we've got Jeremy Utley. Jeremy runs the D School at Stanford. And he's coming, he's our book for January. So if you really want to get ahead, he just wrote the book Idea Flow. So we're excited about that. Our next 3 Conversations with Legends series are pretty epic. So next week on Tuesday, we have Meredith Vieira. So Meredith is a broadcasting icon. 60 Minutes, The View, The Today Show, Dateline. I mean, she really has done it all. She's had an absolutely incredible career. So Meredith's going to be joining us next Tuesday. Then we've got Brian Covey, who is a pro soccer player turned sales executive, personal branding expert. And then we have, Iman loves this person. We have Agape Strasinopoulos, who is Ariana Huffington's sister. And she's a best-selling author and she's a keynote speaker. And I actually met Agape through Iman and became fast friends. She's just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful person. And that what I found is Iman surrounds herself with wonderful people, because I actually met Iman through Heather Monahan. So very cool that it all comes full circle. So today we're joined by Iman Oubou. You guys, I think, know quite a bit about her, but for those of you who are joining who maybe haven't read the book or haven't seen some of the posts, so she is a published research scientist with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology and a master's degree in biomedical engineering, which I'm sure none of us went to school for, but that alone is like impressive enough. I could probably stop there. She's the founder and CEO of Sway Media. She was Miss New York in 2015. She was named by CIO Magazine as the #1 female entrepreneur to watch. She's been a keynote speaker at Harvard and MIT. She's the first ever Face of Morocco, which was an initiative to uplift female voices, not only in Morocco, but in the Middle East. And she's done it all. And the cool thing is, like, the best is yet to come. And what that looks like is going to be fascinating. So before I start firing questions at Iman, Kathy, kick us off.
Inside me, son of a god, I'm like a titan that's rising on just you watch. I'm stepping into fate, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Welcome, Iman.
Awesome. That was so cool.
We are excited. So before we dive into the book, oh, just so everybody knows, the format is I'm going to talk to Iman, ask her a bunch of questions for about 20 minutes or so. Then we're going to open it up for questions that you guys have for Iman. All you have to do, drop in the chat that you have a question. You don't have to put your question in there. We'll tee you up and you can ask your question directly to Iman. Iman, let's start. So most of us, are not immigrants to the United States, and you moved from Morocco, I think when you were 14, right?
I was 15, yes.
So 15. I mean, most people, if you told a 15-year-old that you're moving to a new school district, they probably lose their mind. And you were moving to a new country. What was that transition like to move from Morocco to, I think you guys wound up in Colorado, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Tell us a little bit about how that was for 15-year-old Iman.
Well, I think at the time, I didn't realize how hard the transition was for me because I felt like I was always built to be strong and just kind of go with the flow and accept what's given to me, what comes my way. And I had my ways of dealing with that. But now, especially when I sat down to write the book, I started realizing more and more how difficult that time was for me and how even more difficult it made it that I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And so I know I went through somewhat of a mild depression. And at the time, it was really kind of taboo to really talk to about that to my parents. And I felt like I had some resentment towards my parents for the longest time because, I think up until then, I really thought of immigrants as people who migrated because they needed a better life, because they needed more resources. They wanted to go to other countries to hopefully, make more money and send that back home. And we weren't really in that situation. My parents were doing really well. My dad was CEO of 2 major companies in Morocco, in export and import of fish and all that. So really successful. My mom had her own businesses. We went to private schools. We had really a great life. We had maids and nannies that raised us. We had, private drivers that took us to school. So in my mind, I didn't think that we needed to go anywhere else to live a better life. But my parents, obviously, having been around for much longer than I have, and also having gone to school in Europe, knew that once we graduate our private schools, because they were French schools, we would have to go to college in Europe and in France specifically, which they both had experienced, and it was just not the best environment for them. There weren't a lot of opportunities, especially for people from North Africa. There's a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism out there. Immigrants are not as embraced. There are not a lot of opportunities handed out to them. And so they knew early on that it was not the best solution for us. So when the opportunity to move to America presented itself, because my mom, her sister moved to Colorado when she was in her 20s and has lived there ever since. So when my mom's sister, my aunt, told her that they have an opportunity to come to America and bring the kids, they kind of didn't think twice about it. But a lot of our family members told them that they should just wait until we graduate high school and then they could just send us on our own to America for college, like every person does in Morocco. But my parents were very, insisting that if they're going to send their kids, they need to be with them there for mental support, for moral support, for emotional support, because sending your kids to a new country that they've never been in, having to learn a new language on their own, is probably going to only result in them going the wrong way because they don't have moral support. And so that's kind of how it all really happened. It was so fast for me. So I'm sure my parents have been debating that decision for a long time, but they just haven't really told us as kids. I'm the oldest. I was 15. My brother was, I think, 12 or 11. And so they just really told us when we were about to make that move, probably like a month before or so. So it was very hard because I was in high school. I was finally thinking, okay, I'm fitting in, I'm making friends. And now I have to let all of that go, let family go, and move to a new country that not only have I never been to America prior to that, I never even thought of it. All I knew was European countries that we visited during summertime, but I've never also really spoken English. I had failed English in high school so many times. I didn't really know what to expect. And so the first time we ever went to America was when we moved to America. So it was during summer. And I really wanted to do everything I could to fit into this to high school. So I spent 3 months just learning English, reading books, watching a lot of Disney Channel, a lot of MTV to be able to know how to pronounce things. So I really kind of dove very deep into the language because I did not want to go into high school not knowing how to speak English and not fitting in. And so I ended up doing actually really well when I took my English as a foreign language test, and I was placed in AP English, AP Biology, a lot of advanced placement classes because obviously I spent a lot of time studying the language on my own, but also in Morocco, what we study in high school here in America, you guys study in college. So I was very advanced already from an education perspective, which really made high school for me much easier than I thought, and really allowed me to just, fit in and work on my social skills a little bit. But still, I was struggling with just feeling alone and somewhat depressed because I just felt like I went through a lot in the span of 3 months, and I didn't really take time to process it the right way.
Interesting. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I think this is fascinating. I think anytime like we can get exposure to stuff that most of us are not exposed to, it's so much fun to just learn about new things. So you're a published research scientist with all these crazy degrees that just makes my hair hurt even thinking about studying that stuff. And your mom encourages you to get into the pageant world. So we probably all have ideas of what the pageant world is like, but tell us about that experience of getting into the pageant world. And, then you went on, you not only won Miss New York, you judged Miss Universe. I think you were the first all-female panel of judges. Tell us about that pageant world, and maybe like what don't we know about that you learned through your experiences?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question. And I love talking about this because I was also once someone who really didn't know anything about pageantry. The reason it all came about is because when I was in college, I think they have a system of picking random girls that they send invitations to, when they're young in their teens and all the way until their mid-20s, where they send invitations to participate in these pageants on a state level. And so when I was in college, I've gotten a lot of those invites sent to my parents' house because I think my old address was still my parents' house. And my mom was kind of letting me know about them and be like, okay, this is interesting. She's always really, her and I grew up watching Miss USA, Miss Universe with her as a child. Even when we lived in Morocco, it was televised nationwide, internationally. So it was really an interesting time for us to kind of just watch something we thought we would never, ever do in our entire lives. And so she started kind of getting those invites and she sent them to me throughout my college career. And I just was not really in that headspace. I never thought of myself as a girly girl. I didn't really think pageants were anything that I needed to get involved in. When I was in college, I was very heavy in science. I was trying to get into med school. I was playing a lot of tennis because tennis was a great way for me to kind of let out the anxiety and the stress. And it was a great coping mechanism for me when I did move to the US. Tennis was kind of the therapy for my depression. Mm-hmm. But I did get injured in college when I played tennis. And that was kind of my hobby, my thing to be competitive in. And when my mom saw that, she thought pageantry could be a great replacement for tennis for me because it's a competition and I love to be competitive. And it also gives you something that you could work towards, especially when it comes to working on yourself, staying fit, working out, and just wanting to be better and better every year. And so when she did present me with those invites, I just completely declined. And so when I went to Germany after college on an internship there as a research scientist for 6 months, I came back home because I moved back home to Colorado to go to grad school. And I got a letter in the mail saying that, congratulations, you've been accepted. Thanks for applying. You've been accepted to Miss Colorado USA. You know, the competition is October 31st. And this was, I think I got that around August or so. So it was very approaching. And I'm like, wait, what's happening? What's going on here? And my mom's like, actually, when you went away, I took a chance and I responded to one of the invites and I signed you up because I felt like you definitely needed something to get your mind off of school. And also I'm her only daughter and I grew up as a tomboy and it was something she could not accept ever. And she thought getting me into pageantry would make me reconnect in a way, in her words, with my feminine side. So of course I obliged. I felt bad that she went through all the trouble. So I said, fine, I will give it a chance. And then, you know, I'll do this. If I do this, you won't bring it up again. And so she was very excited and helped me kind of pick up my dress. And she helped me like learn how to walk on stage on heels. So I felt like it was a really great opportunity for us to also spend some time together and really reconnect on a level that I haven't in a long time with her. And when I did actually enter the pageant and I competed, I was pleasantly surprised because it was not anything that I had expected at all. It was, first of all, just the process, I think, leading to the pageant, the day of the competition, had completely transformed me at the time. I really became more interested in my own health, not just physically and how I look, but emotionally, spiritually, you know, psychologically. I really wanted to work on myself to be able to be my strongest self on stage. And also part of the pageantry that you guys don't see usually on TV is the interview portion, which is very important as well, to even advance, to be able to compete on stage. And so I had hired actually a pageant coach to walk me through that because I had no idea what to expect. What kind of questions do they ask? How to sell yourself to a panel of judges in under less than 2 minutes, how to be able to really articulate what your vision and mission is when you do win this title, what makes you the best title holder, what makes you better than the competition. So really being able to prepare those kind of answers, which I think at that point, we really, in college, they don't teach you any of that.
Right.
They don't teach you how to be poised. They don't teach you how to be, you know, articulate. They don't teach you how to communicate about how to sell yourself, who you are. So working with a pageant coach has really introduced me to a whole new level of building my identity in a way. So I really enjoyed that process, and I enjoyed going all in and committing and investing in myself across the board. So when the day of the competition came, you know, I went into it really thinking it's going to be catty and I'm just not here to make friends. I'm here to compete. I'm just going to be in my corner and stay focused. But I was really surprised as to how much of a sisterhood it was. And up until that point, I never had that. I never experienced that. I was, like I said, a tomboy, so I hung out a lot with guys. It felt easier than making friends with girlfriends because there was a lot of drama in college. I opted out of sororities because I just didn't think I would fit in a group of women living together and being like, you know, and supporting each other. I never really believed in that concept at all. So when I went into my first competition, I finally experienced that, and all the women were so incredible. I was kind of expecting a lot of women who just want to be models, or, you know, I was at the time studying to go to med school, and I was a research scientist. So I felt like maybe I don't belong here, but it was completely opposite from what I thought. A lot of women were very accomplished. Some of them haven't started their own nonprofits. A lot of them are very passionate about different causes. So they came there already mission driven, already accomplished. And it's much more than just beauty and glitz and glam. There was a lot more substance that I thought pageantry was about. So of course, my first pageant, I placed in top 10, which was really exciting out of, I think, 62 girls. And to me, that was the only encouragement I needed to keep going, because I'm like, if I did a top 10 on my first try, then I'm sure I'm going to win. So my competitive self kind of just led the way. And I'm like, I'm doing it again next year, and I'm going to keep doing it until I win a title. And that's exactly what happened.
Very cool. And, you know, it was neat being at your book launch party in New York. It was like literally walking into like a Miss Universe pageant, because that sisterhood, there were so many, and it was cool because some of them I think were, you know, newly crowned, pageant winners, and just to see how supportive they all were of you was kind of a cool thing to see.
A lot of my really closest friends to this day are women I met through pageantry. Of course, I have my girlfriends from college, which are like maybe one or two of them. But like I said, I think I never really had the confidence to make friends with women. Up until then, I think also the transition from Morocco to the US and then going to college. And, I never really was a very confident woman. I think especially I was always thinking of myself as less than because I didn't speak, the language. I was not from there. I was an immigrant. So I never really saw myself as a confident, like accomplished woman that could really go up there and win a title like that and represent a state and go to Miss United States and speak about missions and causes she's really passionate about. I always had those insecurities, but I think I will say pageantry has absolutely turned me into the woman I've always wanted to be. And I've also witnessed a lot of women and young girls that I met early on in maybe their first pageant and comparing them to who they are now and who they've become and they blossomed into after going through that system of different pageants. It really just speaks to the strength of it and the kind of platform it is for a lot of women. And I know it's very much seen as I would say an event that objectifies women, but and maybe I did see it like that a long time ago as well, because I didn't know enough about it. But now that I have gone through it and I've seen women emerge out of it, it's really for me more of a platform that empowers women to blossom into who they're meant to be. Because it's in a way I see it as like a mini life boot camp. It teaches you interview skills. It teaches you communication skills, how to send out the right cues to show yourself as a powerful person, how to negotiate, how to sell yourself to someone in under 2 minutes, how to really stand on stage and be confident and not shaking, how to think on your feet. And I think a lot of these skills are not really taught in school. So it was a different type of, I would say, skills. Being able to acquire those skills in pageantry, it was something I did not expect at all.
Right. So let's talk about the glass ledge. So I think we all know the term, the glass ceiling. You chose a little bit of a different angle in writing the glass ledge, which is phenomenal. The 10 chapters are unbelievable. So, tell us kind of why you wrote the book and who's the book for?
Well, so I wrote the book because, I kind of came out of a very tough place back in 2018 where I really struggled because one, I was in that space of, women empowerment, very much driven by fighting for the things that we're not getting, especially women in business and women entrepreneurs who are really trying to kind of build great things and achieve their dreams. But the lack of resources and mentorship and funding were really driving crazy, but also the sexual harassment you go through as a woman trying to raise funds and really build something from the ground up is also very discouraging. And I had kind of gone through a lot of that throughout my initial few years of building Sway. And then I think 2018, it all kind of came down crashing because I fought so hard to finally get an investor that seemed to be in and was kind of able to help us get to the next level with the company. But then last minute, it all fell through. And so I felt like I was, again, at rock bottom and that I was very helpless and that no matter how hard I worked as a young woman trying to prove herself, trying to do great things, trying to empower other women, that it was never enough because my gender basically precedes me and maybe my appearance preceded me at the time too. And nobody was ever going to take me seriously. So I kind of just spiraled into this echo chamber while also because I was so heavy in that space as well. I was, we were advocating for the Me Too movement. It was very much amidst the women's movement. There was a lot happening in the women's space. And I think that subconsciously I had internalized a lot of that and made it my reality, where I just subconsciously put barriers on my own self without really realizing that, and constantly playing the victim and blaming others and society and everything else that wasn't going right for me, as opposed to really looking within and taking control of my own path. And so I was able to at some point do that after 2018, after hitting that rock bottom. And I was very lucky to have a great Forbes article written about me that a literary agent found. And at that point, she reached out to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I could say that a lot of us think about writing books, right, all the time, but it's never really like a concrete dream that you think it's going to happen maybe anytime soon. I thought it was going to be something I would do years later, when I'm in my 50s or so, after I felt like I had more life experience. But she really encouraged me to look at the past few years, everything from transitioning from Morocco to America, then from being a scientist to a beauty queen, then from being a beauty queen to an entrepreneur, and everything I've learned within those pivots, and be able to articulate that in a book that really helped women take control of their path. And so, of course, that felt very compelling to me. And then when I sat down to really think about some of the points that I wanted to get across, I felt like, okay, yeah, maybe I do have a lot to say after all. And so, within that, we pursued the opportunity to get, a book kind of bought by a publisher. Then in 2020 is when I felt ready to actually sit down and write the book. And this was actually right before we thought it was going to be a pandemic or a lockdown. So it worked out perfectly as far as timing goes. And so I decided, all right, I think it's time to take this, year as a way to step back, not only for the book, but also for myself, slow down a little bit, look back at all the reflections I could learn for myself and for other women to pull from, and then be able to articulate that in a book. And so I came up with The Glass Ledge. And the reason why I wanted to really go a different route, because I think I told that to my agent early on and my editor as well, is that I did not want to just create another book that kept reiterating the same research and statistics and issues that we know women can't do this, women don't have this, women can't, because I felt like at that point, feminism just became very obsessed with this rhetoric of reinforcing that what women can't do as opposed to what women can do. And so I wanted to make sure that I create a book that really actually gave the power back to women and taught them how to build their self-awareness, how to look at themselves and their relationship with power, how to understand the right balance when it comes to likability, and all these big overarching themes that are really dominant in our lives, whether it's personal or professional life. And it wasn't also focused on just women in business, but just women in general, young women, older women. I think it's relatable at every point in your life, because you never really stop learning who you are, and you never stop reinventing yourself as well. Right. And that's kind of the confidence and the power I wanted to exude in the book, as opposed to one that is somewhat kind of negative and just reinforces the things that we can do and how unfair society it is to us. Because while we know that that's true to a certain extent, at the end of the day, especially us that live in America, we have a lot of choices and we have a lot of power. Right. We just don't know how to tap into it.
I love this. So there's a quote in the book, and hopefully I don't butcher this, that I absolutely love, because I think it's so in alignment with the Outlier Project. We always say anybody can be ordinary, but we all have the power to choose to be extraordinary. And one of the things that you wrote in the book is that each of us has the power to rewrite the scripts that will determine how we think and behave and succeed. And I'm like, oh my God, that so resonates with me. And one of the cool things, and I think sometimes this is a missed opportunity, when we see a book, I think this happened with Heather Monahan's book, Confidence Creator. I think sometimes it happens with a book like The Glass Ledge, is that, people think, oh, this is a book for women. I wound up getting so much value from the book. That quote that I just, quoted is an example of that. Another one from the book that I'd love for you to talk about quickly, that I absolutely loved, was your authentic self and your adaptive self. I'm like, oh man, that is brilliant. And that applies to anybody. It has nothing to do with gender. And so I think, we're missing out when we see books as, oh, this is a book, that females should read, or this is a book that guys should read, because I get so much and got so much from your book. Talk a little bit about that authentic self, adaptive self.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that was also the point for me, is that obviously I wrote it from a female's point of view, a cis female point of view. And I also kind of talk about that as this can be applicable to anyone. And so obviously my experience is different than, most people out there, but still, I think anyone can draw a lot of the lessons from it. No matter where you stand again in your career, no matter what your gender is. I try to keep it as, of course, general, but also specific as possible so that it applies to anyone reading the book. But also, I think a lot of the publishers too sometimes make you pick a very specific type of demographic for marketing purposes. And so they also kind of make sure that your talking points focus on that demographic because, you're probably if you say this is a book for everyone and everything, it's harder to sell that as opposed to saying this is a book for XYZ. So it's a much more targeted marketing. But yeah, going back to the authentic and adaptive self, I thought it was very important to talk about, especially in the authenticity chapter, because I know we do live in an age where authenticity has become such a big buzzword and just almost like the staple for leadership and for anything that you do. A lot of influencers and people who have completely kind of created success out of nowhere credit authenticity as part of their reasons as to why they succeeded. But I think we don't often talk about your adaptive self, because I think your adaptive self is also very important to take in consideration, because you don't always want to be authentic. You want to make sure that you know when to let your authentic self lead and when to know to let your adaptive self lead. And I think this is more applicable also in the workplace, because for me, I know I had trouble with that because my authentic self at the time was somewhat of a very rebellious, sometimes angry, just want to fight and want to be like, tell the world to F themselves, like that would be really my authentic self. But could I really be that and advance my career? I don't think so. So I had to let my adaptive self really take the lead in certain situations where I felt like I just needed to grow out of my authentic self and be able to adapt to the situation and maybe see things differently and be able to kind of grow into a different person to really excel in a certain environment. And that's okay. And I think had I been really my authentic self throughout all of my life, I wouldn't have excelled and succeeded in pageantry, because my authentic self was a tomboy that didn't want anything to do with dresses and walking on stage with a bikini or answering questions on stage, because I was so nervous and I had this kind of phobia of public speaking. But at that point, I realized that my adaptive self had to lead the way in order for me to grow and push myself outside my comfort zone and be able to achieve something that could potentially be a stepping stone to something more in life. And so I don't think we talk enough about that. I know we talk a lot about pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, but a lot of people don't realize that that's when you're nurturing your adaptive self as opposed to letting your authentic self take over.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to leave the rest of my questions for a cup of coffee with you in New York. So I'll bother you with all the rest of my questions over a coffee.
Sure, anytime.
So we've got a ton of people that want to ask you questions. We'll try to get to as many people as we can, but we're not going to be able to probably get to everybody. We're going to go to Tom in California to ask the first question. Tom, you are up with Iman.
Thank you. Iman, thank you for being here and telling your story. I can't imagine as a teenager being thrown into another country and having to learn another language. I think being a teen is hard enough. Thanks to Aveline, I started following you on Instagram the other day, and I saw one of your reels, and it was very interesting, and I'm curious what sparked it. I'm going to paraphrase it, but you said, I wish social media would go away for a year so that people could get more realistic, I think it was. Can you tell me what sparked that?
Yeah, I'm going through this phase. I think it's maybe not a phase. It's been, I think, lasting, because I was very, very active on social media, especially Instagram, back in my 20s. And now that I feel like I'm in my 30s, approaching mid 30s, I just feel like that it's pulling us more and more out of reality and into this really, I would say, world where we pretend certain things that aren't always true, and we're trying so hard to, I would say, do the most to portray this version of ourselves that is not real. And I think that creates more and more disconnect between I call it higher self, who we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to blossom into, and who we think society wants us to be. I think now with TikTok and Reels, there is this notion of trends, right? So in order for you to be relevant and for you to get likes and views and thrive on social media, you have to jump on a trend that everybody else is doing. I think it takes away from our originality, our ability to think for ourselves, our unique stance. You feel like in order for you to be successful or be kind of relevant, you have to do what everybody else is doing. And I never really subscribed to that school of thought. I always felt like anything that we do in life should reward originality and uniqueness, and really be able to give you the platform and the opportunity to really be who you are, as opposed to following a trend because you're going to get more likes if you follow this trend, or you use this music, or you use this voiceover. It just I think it's just disconnecting us from who we truly need to be. I will say though, obviously social media has a lot of pros as well, but for me, I'm having a hard time these days finding that those pros outweigh the cons.
I have to say, I agree. This summer we were hiking in Zion, and we went out early and we had a great time hiking and getting through there. And then on the way back, a lot of people came, and all people were doing was being on their phones, taking pictures and videos. And I just was so frustrated that you're in the middle of this beauty and you're just TikToking.
Yeah, but you can't help but ask yourself, like, are these people really here for the nature, for the beauty, for the experience? Or are they here to create the content and leave? And I've seen that. And I will say, I was one of those too. Sometimes I really realize, I'm like, wait, I said yes to this plan just because I wanted to Instagram it. That is not okay. I should be excited to be present. And my fiance is very good at reminding me, because he's not really a social media person at all. And I think that's why for me, I've always wanted, like, I'm going to marry someone who's completely not on social, because I need that, reality check every now and then. And sometimes he's like, okay, but you're here in this amazing area and this like beautiful lake, but you have not looked up once. All you do is take photos and edit them and put them into Reel. And then you're like, okay, let's leave. So what was the experience that you actually experienced on your own outside of creating the content around it? And that's the thing. We subconsciously don't even know that we're doing that. And I know I was caught up in it to a point where I felt like it completely disconnected me from being present with my family, with the loved ones, being able to enjoy experiences without feeling like, oh my God, I need to hurry up and like document all of it. It felt very much more pressure for me to use my real life to create something even more extraordinary for people to see, as opposed to enjoy it for myself. And also being able to be myself and original. And it's just a very, it's like a tug of war that is happening in my head constantly. And these days I'm taking a lot of videos and content, but I'm never posting them anymore because I just felt wrong about it.
I just had an interesting experience. So I was just in Atlanta to support my friend Jesse Itzler, who was doing something for his dad. And we went to kind of this after party, and Jesse was there, and Sarah Blakely, and Dougie Fresh, and Run DMC, and Arrested Development, like all these. And in that moment, we were with good friends Megan Riley and her husband Chris, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not taking any pictures. I'm not, even though this was like such an insane opportunity to get pictures with all these amazing people. I'm like, no, I'm going to enjoy the moment. And we wound up, like, to me, 10 o'clock is late. We were there until 2:15 in the morning. Didn't take one picture, and had just the best time because I was present the whole time, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a bunch of questions. We're going to try to get to them quick. So make your questions as quick as you possibly can. Vikram in Tennessee, you're up with Iman.
Hey Iman, nice to meet you. I've really enjoyed listening to your story. Being an immigrant coming to America like at the age of 23, so connected a lot of different parts to your story. I've got your book right here. Amazing. And I dove right into authenticity. I think you touched on a couple of things there, but I'm going to read this definition really quick because I think is probably one of the best authenticity definitions I've ever come across. And I've read a lot of books, but to quote you said, to build your authenticity muscle, you must understand the discrepancies between your beliefs and your actions and pay attention if you doubt what you're saying or doing. And the latter, I think I wouldn't say hurt me, but it's caused more grief in any ways, because sometimes when you're dishing out stories, you're telling people how you are or what you're doing or what your story is, there's parts of me that sort of hold back, because you feel like you want to hold back on something. So how do you build that latter part into your storyboarding? Because clearly you've identified those two steps, adaptive and authentic, which I thought was brilliant. So would you mind expanding on that definition a little bit in your practical life, pageantry? How did you go about overcoming that latter part? Because I think that's where, guys like me sometimes struggle, right? You think you're authentic, but then you feel like, wait a second, you're kind of holding back here. And people feel like it comes across as a little bit of a fearful sort of situation. So
yeah, that's a good one. And I think it starts with understanding why you're holding back. I think maybe spending some time with yourself in a self-reflection state and saying, okay, I wanted to say this, but I held back and said this instead. Why did I do that? Most of the time, I find that the reason is because of fear of judgment, fear of other people's opinions, or being too unconventional for others to understand. So you feel that you're fearing rejection if you were to say something that is really authentic to you, but you don't think other people are going to accept it or accept you. So it really starts with understanding the core reason of why you're holding back and seeing how you can work around that. Obviously, it's easy to say you need to stop caring what people think. I try to remind myself of that every single day. And that's really the core of authenticity, right? Is being really okay with being who you are without fearing what other people are going to think of you. And not only being secure with yourself, but showing it and telling it and really kind of displaying it without really caring what others think. It's a very hard place to get, but I think it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of also surrounding yourself with people that you feel are not judgmental of you, and being able to feel like you're in an environment that allows you to be truly who you are, as opposed to someone who's continuously holding back. So really understanding your environment, the people you surround yourself with, and what kind of fear you're succumbing to, because that's usually why you're holding back. Once you're able to really understand what those are, I feel like writing them down is very important. That's why I think I have a lot of exercises in this book that really help you sit in self-reflection to get to know yourself and build that self-awareness. Because I find that once you have a strong self-awareness and you know these things about you, what triggers your authentic self, what triggers your adaptive self, what triggers you to hold back instead of being fully you, you're able to kind of look for those trigger points and those signals and better prepare yourself in a situation. Yeah. So I would say really start with that, journal what those are, and then kind of work backwards from it. If you don't think that you can open up to someone without holding back, then maybe that's not the right person to be around. Maybe that's not the right environment for you. Maybe the solution for that, instead of trying to change your environment or change other people's perception of you, is to shift to an environment that's more supportive, that's more aligned with who you are, so you don't feel like you're constantly holding back.
Awesome. Thanks,
Phenomenal
Iman.
advice.
One last thing. I've got a 14-year-old, so if I ever come to New York, I'd love for her to meet you.
Yes. My favorite thing is to meet with young teenage women, because I felt like that's the support I needed when I first came here, and being able to like relate and tell my story is always, it makes me feel better about the way I handled myself when, I didn't know what to do back then.
At a minimum, she got to meet Miss New York, and I think that's going to be like an amazing adventure for her. So.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Alex Smith in Florida, you're up with Iman.
Thank you so much, Iman. This is amazing. I loved what you said about adaptive or authentic self. I never thought about it that way. I always considered it just be authentic, be who you are, and know who you are. But there is some situations where your adaptive self you need to lean on. I'm curious about my wife leads an ERN group at her company. So she's really thinking, she's in a male-dominated field in architecture, and in the architecture field. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, the book is a lot about like self-sabotage, like self-sabotaging things that women may do with each other. I'm curious to know in your career if you had examples of what maybe subtle things men have done to sabotage women in the workplace that they may not even realize, that we can learn from, coming from their perspective, not just being a woman but also being an immigrant yourself. I think it's so important, and I want to learn as much as I can from your perspective. So any examples or things that you can kind of point to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I think I experienced. Some of them I was aware of, others I'm not, and that's usually how it is, I think, for a lot of women. And sometimes they don't realize it until they get home and they're like, wait a minute, that was low-key sexist. Well, that was not okay. But I mean, a few examples, I think it's one is not empowering them to speak up. So really being quickly dismissive of anything a woman says, because subconsciously, or you have that unconscious bias that you think she doesn't have the greatest ideas or she doesn't know what she's doing. And it's, it comes from a lot of reasons, but I've seen that sometimes I feel like when I was in a male dominant space, especially in STEM as well, I feel like my ideas were never implemented. My ideas were never really championed. And while I was in a way given the floor in a meeting to speak up and say those, they were quickly kind of dismissed and moving on to the next person. And sometimes a male could say somewhat of a different version of what I said and would be kind of elevated and praised. And, at that point, you're like, okay, maybe it's all in my head. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but most of it sometimes is really worth bringing up to your supervisor or bringing up to your maybe colleagues or whatnot. And if you feel like certain things like that are really deteriorating and discouraging you from being your best self in your workplace, I encourage every woman to go and speak up to her supervisor or HR, anyone that they could feel like they could trust to be able to solve that. I think most often what we do is we just take it and internalize it, and then we hope that it'll go away. And it's just not a great strategy mostly for us, because we end up internalizing and thinking that of ourselves, which is even more damaging. And again, this is where the self-sabotaging comes, is because we start feeding ourselves those same narratives that our external circumstances are giving us, and it becomes our own true identity. And we think of ourselves as, oh, my ideas are not great, I'm not even going to speak up anymore. So it gets to a point where it gradually becomes worse, where you end up damaging your own success because you've internalized it instead of speaking up about it and bringing it up to someone that is able to help you through it, or even realizing that maybe this environment is never going to change. For me to champion me as a woman, I'm just going to go look for another opportunity where that environment is more empowering. Another example for me, obviously, was when I was fundraising. I've obviously been very vocal about this, and in the media, is a lot of the time there are inappropriate comments about my physical appearance, or wanting to take me out to dinner, or asking questions that have nothing to do with what I'm there for. These are not business related questions. These are not questions relating to my pitch. So why are you asking them? And sometimes I'm like, okay, it's a compliment, I'll take it. But still, it's just inappropriate, because it makes that woman think that all she ever is to you is her appearance and her being a woman, and you trying to hit on her, as opposed to actually take what she's saying and what she's pitching seriously. So a lot of inappropriate comments that have nothing to do with business or work related issues should not ever be really, I think, an option for men to say, because it's just not the right environment for it. But a lot of men sometimes don't really realize that. And I mean, I think just also making jokes. Sometimes people are like, it's just a harmless joke, it's just nothing, I'm just kidding. But deep down, it comes from somewhere. So refraining from telling jokes that are very detrimental to women's mental health and just her confidence and her capabilities, her competence are just off the table. That should not be something that comes up at all. And, if someone is seeing this stuff coming up over and over again, then I think it's very crucial to speak up, not for herself, but also for the women in that environment, for the women that are going to come after her and work in that space. So being really mindful of these things that just should not be in work-related environments. The other thing too that I sometimes tell myself to just distinguish between, am I overthinking this? Is it just like harmless, or is this like really serious? Is, if I were a man, would that comment been made, and would have that been okay? Or I asked my brother too, because I feel like my brother has been my sounding board. We were raising money at the same time. We were dealing with a lot of male powerful egos a lot of the time. And so going to him and saying, so this person said that to me or did that, is that normal? Should I like overthink this? Or should I report this? Or should I speak up about this? Having that soundboard would be great. And in the case of your wife, you know, you being kind of there for her to empower her and discuss this with her and really lead her in the right direction is very crucial as well.
Love it. We're going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions. I know we can do it. Doug, you're up, and then Joelle, we're going to you. So Doug in Florida and Joelle in New York.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Kathy. I'll cut right to the chase on timing. Iman, pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for sharing yourself with us on this call. It seems to me, at least, like journaling has been something that's you attach value to and have from some of the things that I had read prior to our call, which I'm a massive fan of. And I'm wondering if that's accurate, especially as you look back during the years, during the difficult, dark times you went through in your teenage years. Have you ever reflected on some of the journaling that you've done way back then? And, you know, what new insights or reinforcements have you learned from that? Anything related to journaling, I would appreciate. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like there's a reason why a lot of kids, when they're growing up, have diaries, right? Because I think it's the best way to express yourself and really get to know yourself and also discover yourself. And I know every time I go home, I have all my old journals and diaries still kind of stacked up in my old room. And I always make it a habit to go back and reread some of the things some of the entries that I made. And it just really, one, it makes me happy because I saw how hard I was trying to work out myself and get to know who I am and really explore my identity across the board. And 2, I realized the power of it because now it's become a habit that has really helped me through some of the toughest moments. And I think even though now therapy and, you know, everything about mental health is it's less taboo and you're able to really talk to people without any judgment. I feel like I still think that there is power to talking to yourself in the form of journaling. And that's probably the best way to really get to know yourself because you don't hold back. Hopefully, you know, no one's going to read this. So you're able to really let it all out. And you're able to go back and check, okay, here's my progress. So on this day, I was really feeling depressed or really anxious or negative, but then I started doing meditation and then I started doing this and look at how gradually I was better at you know, seeing things differently or how I started journaling with a much more positive tone. So you're really also able to track your progress and understand how you're progressing over time and also the things that you're trying to implement and the routines you're adding to your day. Once you document them and you start seeing how they've contributed or not contributed to your well-being, you're able to tweak those as well. Because if you're just kind of trying things out and you're like, okay, I'm gonna try meditation, but then you're not journaling about it afterwards, and you're trying running in the morning, but you're not really journaling about how you feel after that, then you're never really gonna know what progress is. You're just gonna keep trying things without really knowing what the ultimate optimal routine for you is, because that's when you know you're journaling in a very good way, you're feeling great, you're feeling positive, the world is your oyster. And those are my favorite entries. We're like, wow, look at this day. I was really feeling it. I was going after it. And here's what I did the day before or the week before that made me get to that level. So you're able to replicate those results as well.
Love it. Joelle, you're our cleanup hitter.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you so much, Iman. And I want to thank you for your honest and authentic self in your statement about your emails and feeling overwhelmed. I laughed out loud because I do that myself and say, I'm sorry, this ended up in my spam. So I was laughing within the first, 10 minutes of the book. But I wanted to ask you, for those of us that missed out on all the opportunities that pageantry have to offer, what are some recommendations, because I think a lot of the skills that you developed through that opportunity are so valuable. And so many of us are still trying to build it or support those we mentor. So having like those practical resources that we can point people in the direction of or use ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, honestly, anything that is that you feel like is going to push you outside your comfort zone is always a growth opportunity. I guess also being able to hire or work with people who are professionals, whether it's coaches, like I still to this day have a life coach, I have sometimes a business coach. I think never stop learning is very important. Even just a confidence coach, and Heather Monahan has been so great as well. Being able, because I think what pageantry really gave me, if we take away the stage thing and you know the competition part, I think the process of it is really what was helpful for me. And when it comes to the process, it was really about, I hired a pageant coach that really taught me how to interview well, how to speak well. She taught me also the power of storytelling, telling stories as opposed to answering questions straightforward, being able to really relate to someone through, you know, experiences, and being able to spark connection with someone when you're talking to them is the way to win a job interview, is the way to win on public speaking. So these skills that are very, I would say, soft and subtle are very important, because again, the best way to learn those is having someone holding you accountable and also teaching you the ways. Obviously reading about it and watching YouTube videos and watching, even taking courses on them help. But I think when you have someone that kind of practices with you and points out, here's how you're progressing, here's what you're not doing right, or here's what you're doing great, but here's how you can add on to it, is very important. And I besides pageantry, between pageantry and maybe like in my 30s, I kind of stopped hiring coaches because obviously I couldn't afford it at the time. I was starting a business. So I'm like, I'm going to learn everything on my own. But I realized later on that it became more overwhelming for me and discouraging than anything else. So wherever I could find enough to invest in a coach or a course or something that actually helped hold me accountable was always more effective, because it's quick skill learning, but it's also a lot of practice. And if you don't practice, then there's no point of learning, because that's what happens when we read books, right? We read them and then we're on to the next, but we don't take time to practice them with someone that is going to tell us if we're doing it right or wrong. I think the other most important thing too is being able to have a community where there is accountability, a community that is like-minded. For me, obviously pageantry, that's, yep, Scott, there you go. Yep, Scott, he's the king of all that. You know, when I did pageantry, that's really what it was all about, is the sisterhood, the community that helped us get better. We shared resources with each other. We even shared dresses. You know, when I wasn't competing anymore, I gave my dresses to someone else that needed it. We gave advice on how to be on stage, how to talk to the judges. So the resources, the community, and being able to like be motivating to each other is very important. And that's also what I ended up building for myself in business. Is Sway was all about building a community of women who are ambitious, like-minded, driven, entrepreneurial, and be able to help each other tell our stories and learn from each other's stories. So community, and I think skills and practice are very important in pushing yourself forward and getting out of your comfort zone.
This has been an absolutely incredible hour that flew by, Iman. I cannot thank you enough. Definitely follow Iman. I think the best is yet to come. What you've accomplished to date is crazy, but I think it's going to be just so much fun to watch the journey ahead. So I appreciate the time that you spent with us today. We're going to hang out a little bit. So we're going to let Iman go. We'll hang out a little bit after, but Kathy, take us out.
This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Thanks, Iman.
Thank you so much.
So much
and
appreciated.
If you have more questions or anything, I'm always happy to answer anything. Just reach out to me. I'm very good at answering people.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a phenomenal day. Tell Marco I said hi.
Thank you. All right, you guys, bye.
Take care. Anybody who wants to hang out for a little bit, I've got a few minutes.